I'm going to talk about the scalable data architecture, specifically a use case which, like I got to explore, bringing it a one-stop AI solution for the sales. So let's dive deep into, like the problem which existed specifically when thinking about building AI overall and what the architecture we eventually came up with. So the problem, actually looking at the solution, the very one thing is like each sales team here, if you see, is looking at different data sources from like email, collecting the conversation there, or like collecting spreadsheet notes and stuff. The another problem is the output quality, which is like, let's say if you're just generating the summarization and all, is just giving a 68% of like output data quality, which sales team cannot trust on. And 40% of the time is really wasted for sales team from the perspective of collecting all these silo data, which are fragmented in different areas, different notebooks and stuff. Overall, this is bringing the inconsistent customer experience. And what is the core issue which we see with this data architecture problem is the fragmented AI, which eventually is like causing the lost revenue. So what I actually worked on, or get to, like worked on with the team as well, is really looking at how we want that architecture, how we want these pillars, which brings in the success, and making it more one-stop AI solution for the sales team. And and as you see, the three layers that goes into is like the agent orchestration layer, trust. We all have been talking about like, the bigger thing, how the trust and validation framework should be, and the unified data foundation, because we're learning more from the data itself. So as it says, architecture determines the outcome. And like by designing the system for interconnected and orchestrated way, we move away from those silos which are there. Diving into, like the very first layer or the three pillars that I talked about in the previous slide, one is the orchestration layer. So, and this, it's about, like looking at these system components and thinking about how your flow gonna be. So specifically, like, what are different signals, analyzing those signals, where the customer is coming from. Are they coming from like web? What sort of activities do they have? Did they like reached out through chatbots and stuff like that? So analyzing those signals, like intent recognition. Content generation engine, which is like, what should we do when we collected these different analytic points? Like, do we want to, producing more personalized attest with that. Engagement optimizer, like, doing more engaged conversation, sales being more engaged with the customer, providing those sort of optimizer for them to be more predictive that, this is gonna turn into an opportunity or a deal for us. So on the right, as you see, it's the architectural flow, which talks about, the inbound lead signals that we should be looking at, building a confidence based on the intent classifier, how we want to produce our data. 85% confidence threshold is something, like that we did set up. Matching engines and engagement scheduler, which gives more of architectural flow for the orchestration. Trust framework, which is the bigger one or the main picture as after like, the orchestration layer that comes in. And in today's AI-driven system, trust isn't just about like, nice to have. It's something which is more about the long-term consistency. And specifically in this AI world, like, where we need to ensure that there is a right information provided in terms of conversation that is happening, in terms of when a sales is interacting with the customer, it goes into a customer 360 data. So ensuring that the right customer 360 data is there. So building all that pipeline that goes into these three components about like, having a pre-deployment validation. Hallucination is one part of it when it comes from the perspective of like, looking at the Gen AI summaries that are generated, or confidence scoring pipeline, and a feedback mechanism which is coming through human interaction. So now let's complete the overall three-pillar picture with the third being the data foundation, which is the unified knowledge architecture. So what was happening in the traditional or the fragmented sources, every information is lying in the different areas like CRM system, documentation, which are like individual notes, spreadsheets, or tribal knowledge, interaction histories, which are part of emails, different sales rep talk to different people. With this scalable unified architecture is where these three things comes in, is about like vector database, the vector knowledge graph, continuous learning where every interaction is not silo versus it's integrated, and then the quality monitoring of those automated freshness checks. So from the trust architecture itself, this is a target performance matrix, which is sort of like an industry benchmark that we considered, and is sort of something we are seeing from the pilot implementation as well. What this architecture, we do observe a 90% of the response accuracy, user trust score, because a lot of pilots, there were sales team just wanted to keep it the old way with fragmented data versus with new architecture. In the pilot, the trust score really increased. That ultimately increased the adoption rate by 85%. And a weekly saving of 3 hours went into where the sales reps are individually trying to collect the data points versus with this one, they could spend more time interacting with customers and convert that into deal. So this is a complete system architecture, which is layered into 5 these different layers: presentation layer, orchestration layer, intelligence, data, and integration. Presentation layer being more user focused, orchestration as we talked, intelligence where we are looking at all these customer different LLM service and stuff, data layer, and then the integration, which is more internal systems and all. Considering the time, I'll just quickly glance over this. As this is the phased implementation of how it went about from building the scalable solution and architecture, and probably something for everyone to consider that it's going to take sort of up to 12 weeks, where week 1 goes into foundation, up to week 4, 5 to 8 goes into core agents, and scale and optimization is 9 to 12 week. So overall, what's the observation as part of this is in most of the industries for the sales, the current state is fragmented data sources, a lot of disconnected AI tools, we are bringing AI, we are using the open source from which are more disconnected, which does not have a data transfer, inconsistent outputs, and low trust and adoption. What this scalable architecture you would see, which is on the right, is the unified knowledge foundation, orchestrated agent workflow, and built-in trust and validation, which ultimately helps in being it more reliable and continuous improvement. So the system evolves with the feedback and the performance data. So I would recommend reviewing this and identifying a one sales workflow and design the architecture which helps measuring the quality and turns into making it a success for your product purchase, deals, and negotiation.